In Episode 8, titled Administer Administrative Controls and Prove Compliance, we position administrative controls as decision rules you can show and defend, not just documents you can quote. When a policy becomes a behavior you can observe and an artifact you can produce on request, it earns its place beside technical safeguards as a real risk reducer. The System Security Certified Practitioner, spelled SSCP on first mention, lives at that intersection, where governance meets operations and evidence ties them together. Our aim is to turn policy words into traceable actions, measured outcomes, and a repeatable proof pack that satisfies both internal leaders and external assessors.
Start by drawing clean lines between policies, standards, and procedures, then demonstrate the thread that runs from intent to action. A policy states direction and boundaries in plain language. A standard translates direction into required settings or behaviors. And a procedure describes how people perform those requirements consistently. Alignment is traceable when each policy cites its purpose and owner, each standard references the parent policy and names specific parameters, and each procedure links to the standard and shows step-by-step execution with roles and control points. You make that alignment visible with document identifiers, revision dates, approvers, and cross-references embedded in the headers, plus a short control objective sentence that mirrors the risk you intend to reduce. With this structure, anyone can follow the chain from principle to proof without a meeting.
People controls begin before day one and continue as a governed life cycle, which is why background checks, onboarding attestations, and a sanctions policy must be documented and approved. Background screening follows lawful criteria set with human resources and legal, records outcomes as eligible or ineligible without sensitive details leaking into operational systems, and is rerun when roles elevate into high-risk duties. Onboarding includes signed acknowledgments for the code of ethics, acceptable use, and confidentiality, with timestamps, identity verification, and storage locations listed in the personnel file. A sanctions policy, approved by leadership, describes progressive discipline for willful violations and protects against arbitrary enforcement. Each invocation is recorded with dates, decision-makers, and the specific clause breached. This is how a people standard becomes an auditable trail rather than lore. Separation of duties and mandatory vacations convert fraud-resistant design into everyday practice. In a simple finance and access example, the person who creates vendors cannot approve payments. The person who grants privileged access cannot approve their own request or deploy the change. And high-risk roles require a peer checkpoint or two-person control. Mandatory vacations, defined, scheduled, and enforced, expose patterns that only surface when someone else runs the desk for a week, and the coverage plan itself becomes evidence that the control operates. Logs and requests tell the story: requester identity, approver identity, ticket numbers, and the specific actions taken. When you can show that no individual can complete a risky end-to-end chain alone, you have turned principle into prevention. Third-party governance extends your administrative controls beyond your four walls through due diligence, contracts, service-level agreements, spelled SLAs on first mention, and evidence of ongoing oversight. Due diligence assesses security posture, financial stability, and operational resilience before selection, capturing the findings, risks, and acceptance decisions with named approvers. Contracts and SLAs incorporate security addenda, right to audit, breach notification timelines, log retention, vulnerability management targets, and map them to the services purchased. Oversight continues with periodic attestations, targeted evidence requests, and issue tracking tied to remediation dates. A vendor file that contains pre-award assessment notes, signed clauses, quarterly check-ins, and closed corrective actions is the working model of third-party control. Training and awareness programs only count when they measure completion, comprehension, and behavior change, not just attendance. Completion is the easy metric: percent of staff by role and by location finishing required modules on time. But comprehension requires short assessments that test understanding of specific, risky scenarios relevant to the job. Behavior change shows up in independent data: fewer preventable incidents, improved phishing simulation performance, and cleaner audit results in areas covered by training. Role-based content for administrators, developers, analysts, and managers proves respect for context. And refresher frequencies are written down with owners who review outcomes each quarter. When leaders can see a dashboard that links learning to observed results, training has crossed from checkbox to control. Risk assessments are the engine that updates policies and control choices with timestamps and owners. A formal assessment names the asset, process, or vendor, states threats, vulnerabilities, and impacts, and rates inherent and residual risk with cited assumptions. The output is a set of decisions: accept, avoid, transfer, mitigate, each with a control adjustment, a named owner, and a due date. Governance requires that changed risks trigger document updates. The policy gains a clarified boundary, the standard tightens a parameter, and the procedure adds an extra verification step. Every change entry carries a reason code tied to the assessment record, so reviewers can see why words moved and whether that movement reduced risk as intended. Change management sits at the seam where governance and engineering meet, and the evidence must link approvals, configurations, and after-action reviews, spelled AARs on first mention. A normal change begins with a ticket that describes scope, risk, test plan, and rollback. A change advisory board records approvals with names and timestamps, and the implementing team references configuration items or commits that actually changed. Post-deployment, a quick AAR captures outcomes, expected, unexpected, user impact, and any compensating actions taken. Emergency changes follow a shorter pre-approval path but require a mandatory AAR and retroactive approval within a fixed window. When you can read the ticket and find the config diff and the review in one place, your program is coherent. Metrics are your early warning system for control effectiveness, and they must trigger corrective actions when trends slip. Define leading indicators: time to revoke access on terminations, percent of vendor assessments completed before purchase, number of exceptions with expired end dates, and lagging indicators: incidents tied to policy violations, audit findings by category. Set thresholds and owners. When access revocation exceeds a defined hour limit, an automated task opens against the responsible team. When exception expiries pass 5%, a cross-functional review freezes new exceptions until the backlog drops. Governance forums review trends, agree on root causes, and assign specific, dated actions. A metric that never changes behavior is a chart, not a control. Mapping administrative controls to regulatory or framework clauses is easier when you narrate an evidence table rather than drowning readers in it. For each clause, state the requirement in a sentence, name the policy and standard that fulfill it, and list the routine artifact that proves operation. A sample access review, a completed training report, a vendor oversight record, a change ticket with approvals. Include scope notes, systems covered, locations affected, and retention periods so auditors know where to look and for how long. This narrative becomes the index to your repository. It reduces friction during assessments and keeps internal stakeholders aligned on what good looks like for each obligation. Shelfware risk is real. Beautiful documents that never leave the wiki. Operationalize policies through checklists embedded in daily tools, automated gates where possible, and small audits that sample for living evidence. A joiner-mover-lever checklist lives in the ticketing system and requires attachments before closure. A code review checklist includes security criteria drawn directly from the standard. A visitor log audit cross-checks pre-registration, badge issuance, and badge return for 1 week each quarter. When procedures are discoverable at the moment of work and completion requires proof, documents become behavior. That is the antidote to binderware. To make this concrete, run a mini audit scenario that tests 2 controls and collects screenshots and sign-offs. First, select user access reviews for a restricted system. Pull the latest review record, capture the attestation screen with the reviewer's name and date, and sample 2 removals to verify they were executed with ticket references. Second, test change management. Choose a recent high-risk change, gather the approval page with named approvers, link to the configuration diff or deployment record, and include the AAR entry that notes any deviations. Route your mini-pack to the system owner and the control owner for sign-off and record their acknowledgments. In less than an hour, you have proof that 2 administrative controls are alive. Now, assemble a lightweight evidence pack for 1 control of your choosing, so the practice becomes habit. Pick something you touch frequently: training completion, vendor onboarding, or exception management, and collect 5 artifacts: the governing policy excerpt, the applicable standard, the active procedure, a current period sample record that shows operation, and a brief owner attestation with a date and name. Add a one-paragraph narrative that explains how the control reduces risk and how you measure its effectiveness. Then, store the pack where your team can find it during audits or incidents. The point is speed and clarity, not volume. Small, current packs are more credible than sprawling archives nobody can navigate. Finally, set a quarterly policy review cadence with named reviewers and due dates so the administrative program keeps its shape over time. Build a rolling calendar that assigns each policy and its related standards to a quarter. Names a responsible and an accountable reviewer using the Responsible, Accountable, Consulted, Informed model, spelled RACI on first mention, and lists the consulted roles who will be asked for operational feedback. Each review produces a short decision: reaffirm as is, revise with change entries tied to specific risks, or retire and merge. Publish outcomes, update cross-references, and open tasks for follow-through with clear ownership and dates. When cadence, names, and deadlines are explicit, compliance stops being an event and becomes part of how the organization works. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.